Welcome to FreeSBC, a new approach to the SBC, a webinar event hosted by TelcoBridges. First, a couple of introductions to get started. I'm Alan Percy, the Senior Director of Product Marketing for TelcoBridges and today's event moderator. Having joined the company in December, I'm the new kid on the block and responsible for driving awareness of the session border controller solutions from TelcoBridges. Also joining me today is Mark St-Onge. He's the Director of Sales Support for TelcoBridges. Mark has a long history with the company, providing technical expertise and advice to customers across the globe. And Mark, thanks for being part of today's event.
You're welcome. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Very good. Very good. And we're glad to have your attendees with us today. Encourage you to use the opportunity to interact with myself and Mark, posing your questions and comments. Let's get started with a little bit of background first. As network architects and service providers and large enterprises plan their migration to the cloud infrastructure, one network security element plays a critical role and needs very special treatment: the session border controller. At the crossroads of real-time voice and video traffic, SBCs are tasked with providing protection against denial of service attacks, facilitating NAT traversal, providing topology hiding, and resolving interoperability issues, and much, much more. During a recent briefing with Greg Collins at Exact Ventures, he shared with us some observations and forecasts on the changes that he's seen in the session border controller market. One significant change is the shift from SBCs being physical appliances to virtualization and the deployment in cloud. According to his forecast, by 2022, over 75% of SBC deployments will either be virtualized or cloud-based. And we think this is a significant change to the market and requires a change in business as usual. The traditional way of paying for network infrastructure assumed a hardware-centric appliance needed to be purchased, requiring a large upfront capital expenditure, followed by maintenance freeze over the life of the equipment. The result was front-loading of the total cost of ownership, or TCO, a real problem for providers that are just starting out and are trying to build a customer base. The new cloud way is much, much more software-centric, where the initial costs are low and increase later when a paid subscriber base is established by the provider. This model provides more opportunities for fostering new services and new applications, ideally growing new business opportunities. Recognizing these needs, TelcoBridges offers FreeSBC, a software SBC solution designed specifically for cloud and virtualized deployments. Highly scalable with carrier-grade reliability, FreeSBC is a commercial SBC offered under a freemium business model. We feel FreeSBC better fits the emerging cloud application market needs for an affordable voice security. We got a lot to cover today, and we're going to start out with a quick introduction to the people behind FreeSBC. We're going to spend some time comparing the free and paid version. We'll look at some target use cases and details on capabilities. We've also got a customer case study lined up showing how a major carrier addressed a SIP trunking performance issue in their network. And finally, we'll step you through the download and activation process, allowing you to evaluate the software in your own lab environment. And to get things started, Mark, I'm going to turn it to you and start out with a quick introduction on TelcoBridges and the people behind the company.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. TelcoBridges is a Canadian company. Company was founded in 2002, so almost 16 years ago. We're based in Montreal, or actually in a suburb of Montreal. That's where I'm sitting now. And that's where TelcoBridges performs all of its activities, or almost all of its activities. We have hardware engineering here. I have my colleagues in software development that are located in the same office as I am, as well as our production facility here in our offices in Montreal. We also have other offices where we have sales staff as well as customer support engineers, so that we can provide 24/7 technical support using these various offices so that we're always able to answer customer calls. Alan?
Yeah, so one of the questions, of course, is, who are some of TelcoBridges' customers? So maybe you could just walk through some of the customers for the company.
Sure. TelcoBridges products and the products that we offer are, not only a session border controller products such as FreeSBC, but we're also a manufacturer of voice over IP gateways, transcoding gateways, as well as signaling gateways. And our products are targeted at carriers. They're typically not used in an enterprise application, and that's because of the protocols that are supported in the case of the gateways, such as SS7, SIGTRAN, but also because of the performance of our products and their capacity as well. So our products are targeted at carriers, and the typical carrier or customer that uses our products is a wholesale voice service provider, or a competitive local exchange carrier, or a competitive service provider that needs to terminate calls in a given country and they need to interconnect with the main carrier there, or they need to do some voice over IP peering with international long distance providers that use voice over IP. And the FreeSBC product is targeted at such applications. Alan?
Yeah, no, I know one of the areas I know a lot of folks have expressed interest in is about this discussion of the freemium business model. This obviously takes some explanation. So can you just share how does this work, and how is something free, and then what are some of the premium features?
Yes, for sure, I'll do that. So the freemium model is one where you can obtain, the major a product that supports the major functionality, but you can also pay to obtain some additional features or some premium features. And this is the way that we are offering FreeSBC. So you can obtain the core FreeSBC software for $0. You simply go to the FreeSBC website and you download it. And then if you do that, you support yourself using our online documentation on the wiki, and you also obtain some periodic updates of the software, whenever TelcoBridges adds new features, and we want to make it available to our FreeSBC users. But you also have the option to pay and to obtain some additional features and support. So if you do opt to pay for a FreeSBC, well, what you get is 24/7 access to our customer support engineers. You get regular updates of the FreeSBC software. You get access to 2 sets of additional features that you can use on FreeSBC. One's called TB Analytics, which is a set of troubleshooting tools, and the other one we're calling OSS BSS connectors, which allows you to interface FreeSBC with back office systems. Transcoding is also supported by FreeSBC, and the way transcoding is supported is through the purchase of hardware. We offer these transcoding devices that use voice over IP DSPs to handle the media, change codecs, change the way DTMF tones are transported, and so on. What telco, and in a few slides here, I'll be detailing, what is the really itemized list of what's the difference between the free version and the paid version, and I'm going to detail what are these TB Analytics tools and OSS BSS connectors. But here I just want to add one last thing, is that we are also creating around FreeSBC an alliance partner program. And the idea of this alliance partner program is to bring to the table third-party solutions that complement FreeSBC, such as a billing solution, a fraud detection solution, a management solution, and so on. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail later.
Excellent. Well, one of the things I'm sure people want to dig into is, of course, the a little bit more detail on the comparison between those two, and so we prepared this great little chart here.
Yeah, and let me talk to this slide a little bit. So what you see on this slide is a list of features on the left, and then you have two columns, free and paid. And what this slide is showing is what's included in the free version and what's included in the paid version. But I'm going to use this slide to make it very clear to everyone, right, that FreeSBC is a virtual session border controller software that you install on a computing platform. And whether you opt to use the free version or the paid version, you get exactly that. A carrier-grade SBC that functions as a back-to-back user agent, implements the security features that you're looking for, NAT traversal, you can manipulate SIP headers. It has an integrated call routing engine. You can limit call rates. You can limit the bandwidth on SIP trunks. It supports 1+1 configuration for high availability. And so in terms of SBC functionality, everything is included in the free version, as well as in the paid version. But if you do opt to pay, what additional functionality or what add-ons you get are at the bottom of this table, and they're in the last 4 rows here. Like I said, you get 24/7 access to our customer support engineers. Transcoding devices are payable. This is hardware that if you need to support transcoding, you need to purchase, and these transcoding devices are controlled by FreeSBC. And then finally, you get TB Analytics network troubleshooting tools, which I'll tell you more about later on. And you get some connectors or interfaces to interact with third-party systems that we call OSS, BSS connectors, for example, to interconnect with a billing system or to interconnect with management systems. One thing that you should know is that if you do download, let's say, the free version, or you opt for the free version of FreeSBC, you do have the TB Analytics features and the OSS, BSS connectors on a trial basis for 90 days. So that you can check to see if these can be useful for you.
Awesome. Well, I know one of the questions is does it perform? What kind of density, what kind of capacity does it have? So I think that based on some of the different system configurations, it'd be great to share some of the performance figures.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Let me describe this. So we wanted to show this slide to make it very clear to everyone what you can expect out of FreeSBC. And so this virtual session border controller software can be installed on a bare metal server or on a virtual computing platform or in the cloud. And what we're showing here is to give you an idea of performance, what you can get out of these different computing environments. So as the top row here is the maximum number of simultaneous calls or maximum number of concurrent sessions. And then a little below here, we have some numbers on call handling performance, completed calls per second and call attempts per second. And I think that most of you would agree with me that the performance figures are quite impressive. Of course, we get the best performance on a bare metal server, but the performance that we can get out of a VMware computing platform or OpenStack KVM are also impressive. And you see Alan, there are some footnotes here, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you go to the FreeSBC website to get the data sheet, what we explain is exactly on what computing platform we were able to achieve these numbers. And just for everybody's information, we run these performance tests. They're part of our regression tests in the lab. So you can be confident that if you do decide to use FreeSBC and you install it on a server or on a virtual machine, you will be able to get similar numbers.
Right, right. Well, very interesting. Okay, well, let's move on and let's start to talk a little bit about some of the use cases. I know you had prepared 3 different use cases here to share with everyone.
Yes, and so the first one is a use case for voice over IP peering. So what you see on this slide are, 2 service providers represented by these 2 clouds. And in this scenario, the service provider on the right is interfacing or interconnecting with a wholesale voice over IP service provider. And so the one application for FreeSBC is for voice over IP peering, where we're showing here that FreeSBC is being used to interconnect these operators together. What we're looking for in a session border controller that's used in an application like this is a large session capacity. And we just saw the numbers on the previous slide. We're looking for a session border controller that integrates call routing, SIP header manipulation, and has the ability to generate call detail records. And the FreeSBC is, in an application like this, is typically deployed on a server, on a virtual machine, within the service provider's network. And the integrated call routing allows the service provider to control, where calls are sent, depending on typically the called telephone number, and sometimes also based on the calling telephone number. Alan, could you show the next use case, please?
Sure.
So this one is where FreeSBC is used in the access network. So what FreeSBC is being used for in this case is to secure the service provider's network, or secure the soft switch in the service provider's network. That is, to prevent it from being attacked for denial of service, or maybe registration scanning, or maybe just how would I say, just plain bandwidth, high bandwidth attack on the soft switch. So in an application like this, where FreeSBC is used facing small, medium-sized businesses or enterprises, we're looking for a session border controller that also has a large session capacity. We can imagine that this service provider may have thousands or tens of thousands of subscribers, or businesses it's providing hosted IPPBX services to, for example. We're looking for a session border controller that has a high performance, that is able to perform different types of NAT traversal. And we're looking for a session border controller that can not only pass through register requests, from IP phones in the access network to the soft switch, but also a session border controller that can maybe throttle such register requests, so that throttle register requests and refresh register requests, so that these do not overwhelm the soft switch. And FreeSBC includes all of these functionalities, and that's why it's positioned as an access SBC as well as a peering SBC.
And I think the third case you wanted to share was about a contact center.
Yes, that's right. So the FreeSBC, because of its high performance, its high call handling performance, because it's able to limit call rates, it's able to limit the bandwidth used on certain SIP trunks. Also because it has an integrated call routing engine, which is very sophisticated. For example, you can implement call routing based on calling and called telephone numbers. You can implement routing based on time of day, day of week. You can load balance calls on different SIP trunks or different providers. The FreeSBC is ideal session border controller for contact centers. What we're showing here on this slide is a contact center that is using a dialer, for example, and that is placing call on the PSTN. And this contact center needs to route calls to different service providers depending on the called telephone number. For example, if the dialer is calling a mobile telephone number or a fixed line telephone number or a long distance telephone number, we want to be able to route the call to different service providers, and typically FreeSBC will route the call to the service provider that's offering the least cost for this route. And then, Alan, just a matter of detail, but it's important for contact center applications, is that the FreeSBC is able to map cause codes. So the idea here is that when the dialer is placing a call and that call doesn't succeed, it may succeed for different reasons. Maybe the number is not allocated, the number doesn't exist, the trunks were busy, or other reasons. That FreeSBC can be configured to map the incoming cause code from the service provider to another cause code towards the dialer. And this is really useful for contact centers who will make decisions. The dialer will make decisions based on the cause code, to keep a telephone number on the list or to remove it, for example, because the number does not exist.
Right. No, I know that's important. So let's move on and talk about deployments. We've covered the use cases, so we move on and talk about some of the different platforms that it can be deployed on. And I know there were some questions about this in the queue already.
Okay, so then I'll try to explain as clearly as possible in an attempt to answer the questions here in advance. So like I said earlier, FreeSBC is a virtual session border controller. FreeSBC is software developed by TelcoBridges with a SIP stack that's been deployed since 2006. So the SIP stack is mature. TelcoBridges has full control over its SIP stack. And so this software that you download from the FreeSBC website can be installed on a bare metal server. It can be installed on a virtual computing environment such as VMware, OpenStack, or KVM. And it can also be installed in the cloud. The software that you download will be installed on these platforms, and as it installs, it will discover network interface cards, and it allow you to configure, at the very least, a LAN port and a WAN port, but you can have many gigabit Ethernet or 10 gig interfaces that can be controlled by FreeSBC. And once again, we showed performance numbers earlier. You will get the highest performance numbers out of a bare metal server, but you will still have very strong performance numbers out of a virtualized computing environment. And we have, I know that some people are concerned about you putting real-time communications on the cloud or on a virtual computer. But we have ways of configuring these computing platforms in order to get the most or the best performance out of these installations.
Right. And I know one of the questions that's been rolling around relates to some of the other virtualized environments, and probably one of the key things to share about the deployment model is the software image does include an embedded operating system, and it is completely turnkey. as Mark mentioned, so that even on a bare metal server, it comes with the embedded CentOS operating system.
Yeah, that's correct. And just to give the detail is FreeSBC runs over CentOS 7, and when you download the software, the CentOS 7 comes with the FreeSBC software.
Right, right. All right, let's dig into some specific features and capabilities. And you talked about some of the manipulation that FreeSBC can handle. So maybe we can just dig into a couple examples here.
Yeah, for sure. Just use this slide to make it very clear to everyone that FreeSBC, whether it's the free, you opt for the free option or for the paid option, you can manipulate SIP headers and you have access to the full SIP header. You can prepend or append digits to telephone numbers, calling or called telephone numbers. You can modify the privacy information in the SIP header. You can insert or remove custom SIP headers. And FreeSBC even supports SIP-I and SIP-T. It's used today for this SIP to SIP-I conversion, where some service providers are using TelcoBridges products to because they need to use SIP-I to interconnect with a specific service provider. And just briefly for everyone's benefit here is SIP-I, the I of SIP-I stands for ISUP, which comes from SS7 signaling. And the idea of SIP-I is to be able to transport SS7 signaling information elements that do not map well into SIP headers. And many service providers will find out that other service providers with which they may want to interconnect with will require the use of SIP-I or SIP-T, and FreeSBC is a solution for them.
Well, I know routing was part of the discussion you chatted about earlier, and there's a couple different models for routing. So this should be explained in more detail. So why don't you share how this works?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that the FreeSBC integrates its own call routing engine, and it's a class 4 call routing engine. So and there are different call routing methods within FreeSBC. The easiest one is what's called a static routing table, where you can configure for yourself a routing table that, for example, defines for incoming trunk groups with specific calling and called telephone numbers or prefixes or telephone numbers using wildcards. You will map that call to an outgoing call on another trunk group with or without digit manipulation. This static routing table can also implement percentage routing. So you can define that for a given route, a certain percentage of calls will go to a specific outgoing route and another percentage to another, and so on. You can also load share using the FreeSBC integrated call routing. You can load share traffic on different soft switches, or load share traffic on different routes. Or, for example, if you had a conference server, FreeSBC could be put in front of the conferencing server. All of these call routing capabilities are integrated into FreeSBC, and they are included with the software. Now, what's more is that FreeSBC can also interface with external call routing servers, and we have alliance partners that offer such external call routing solutions. And the interfaces that are offered in order to do this there are two of them. There's SIP and there's radius protocol. If you use a SIP interface, well then an incoming call to the FreeSBC will generate a SIP invite to the route server, and that route server will respond with, for example, a 302 redirect, and in the contact information in that response, we'll find one or more routes instructing FreeSBC on how to route the call. And similarly, using radius, it's just another protocol. But Alan, I'll just say one last thing here is because I'm talking about radius here, and I want to make it clear that the radius interface is only available in the paid version. But everything else that I've mentioned here on this slide is available in the free option of FreeSBC.
Right, right. So next, I think, everything doesn't always necessarily go perfectly on a network, and sometimes networks need to be diagnosed. So maybe you could share with us a little bit of information about some of the network troubleshooting tools.
Yeah, for sure. And these are very cool tools. I'll first state right away that these network troubleshooting tools are integrated with FreeSBC, and they are available in the paid version only. These tools are called collectively TB Analytics, but they individually, they're called call trace, test call, live Wireshark capture, and call recording. I'll touch just a bit on each of them to explain, try to convey what the value is in these tools. So first of all, the call trace tool is one where FreeSBC retains in memory and on disk the information or the signaling information for historical calls. Using the call trace tool, which is embedded in the web interface to configure and manage FreeSBC, is a tool where you can search in these historical calls for a specific call you're looking for, and for which you want to see a ladder diagram with the signaling information and FreeSBC's call routing decisions on this call. And this troubleshooting tool is used every day by our customers, by our customer support engineers. And just as an example, you may, as a service provider using FreeSBC, you may have a customer that calling and said, yesterday my calls weren't getting through to Mexico. We tried all day and it just wasn't connecting. And then you can ask, okay, what number were you calling? When did you call? What time? Yesterday? Any information to help you search for the call, the historical calls that were made the day before using call trace, and then you can view the ladder diagram for these call attempts, and you can see if your customer is right, and you can troubleshoot if in fact, the calls weren't completing. You can find out why using the call trace tool. Now briefly, moving on to the next troubleshooting tool is test call. This is an integrated tool within FreeSBC that allows the FreeSBC software to generate its own test call. And it's a real call that the FreeSBC will initiate. You can initiate an incoming call to FreeSBC, and you can initiate an outgoing call. If you place an incoming test call, well, you'll be testing the way FreeSBC will route that call, as well as the result of that call, on the outgoing trunk group. You can play tones. You can play pre-recorded audio using test call as well. And the value in this tool is really that when you're making configuration changes to the session border controller, you can do everything yourself. You know, Alan, I don't need to have someone at the other end on the phone and say, okay, go ahead, you know, make the call now, I'm ready.
Right.
You can do it yourself, which saves a lot of time. It's very useful. And then the last troubleshooting tool I'm going to talk about is the live Wireshark signaling capture. So FreeSBC has the ability to capture SIP signaling, and it can stream this captured SIP signaling directly to a desktop where Wireshark is running, and you can view the signaling live on your desktop using this feature. Of course, you can also, you know, record this SIP signaling to disk in a PCAP file, and you can open it with Wireshark. But it's very useful to be able to view the signaling live when you're troubleshooting your network. Alan?
Yep. Well, that I think is a good perspective on some of the tools that can help diagnose it. Earlier you talked a little bit about the Alliance Partner Program, and I think it's worth spending a couple of minutes to talk about all the other things that are available outside FreeSBC that are part of our plans for the Alliance Program.
Yeah, for sure I can do that. So what you see on this slide is, you know, FreeSBC software, the TelcoBridges virtual session border controller software, surrounded or complemented by solutions from alliance partners. These are companies that TelcoBridges is partnering with in order to, you know, certify the interoperability of FreeSBC with the partner's solution, in order to make it, in order to complement the FreeSBC, which is in fact, you know, a session border controller. And we understand that as a service provider, you need other functions to run your business, such as billing, for example. You may need a soft switch as well. And so this is what we're doing here with this Alliance Partner Program is bringing other solutions to the table that complement FreeSBC. And so let me say just a few words on some of these. So of course there's a billing solution that is certified and verified to work well with FreeSBC. And these solutions, for example, there's a billing solution from Fastlink, and another company is Jerasoft. These billing platforms use the call detail records generated by FreeSBC to perform the billing. Please be reminded that the ability to generate call detail records is available only in the paid version of FreeSBC. It turns on, you know, the ability for FreeSBC to write text CDRs or write CDRs to a Radius server. So this is required for such billing platforms. There's also, you know, an innovative company called TransNexus that has a fraud detection solution. TransNexus uses information in incoming SIP invite messages, and it uses call detail records as well to detect fraud. And the TransNexus solution complements FreeSBC in instructing in real time the FreeSBC to process a call, to refuse the call, or to send the call somewhere else based on their fraud analysis. There's also TriJet Services, who's offering a hosted service for FreeSBC. So if you're a service provider and you don't want to be bothered with servers or virtual machines, or you know, renting a rack in a data center, dealing with remote hands to install all of this, you can count on the services of companies such as TriJet to help you deploy FreeSBC and use it. And then just two words, Alan, to mention that FreeSBC is certified and has been verified to work with a very long list of soft switches, and the list of vendors is available on our wiki. The list is too long to put here, but all the major brands are there. And FreeSBC is, you can deploy it in confidence with the soft switches that are listed there.
Yep. Yeah, no, in fact, one of the questions that popped in was asking exact that question. Where do I go to find the list?
Yeah.
And TB Wiki's the place to go.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe to guide the person who was asking a little more, if you go to the TelcoBridges wiki, which, by the way, the URL is docs, DOCS, .telcobridges.com. On the landing page, the home page, if you look to the right in the last column, there is a section called certification, and there's a hyperlink to that's labeled vendors, and you'll find the information there.
All right, so now I'm sure some folks have been waiting for the case study, and I think that this is an important proof point. And why don't you start out with just introduce real quick MakaTel and who they are and what their role in the industry is.
Yeah, sure. MakaTel is a service provider in Mexico. They're based in Monterrey, and their business is delivering voice services, delivering services to the enterprise market, also serving carriers. They have a wholesale business, a voice wholesale business as well, and they're also providing data connections as well all around the world.
And they had a very unique challenge. One of the issues that they were struggling with was with performance on their SIP trunks with customers that were overloading their SIP trunks. So maybe you can dig into that.
Yeah, for sure. So what was going on there at MakaTel with their voice service business with enterprises is that many of the enterprises they're serving are call centers or contact centers. And like we discussed a bit earlier, such contact centers have dialers, so they're making a very large amount, they're placing a very large amount of outbound calls on the PSTN via MakaTel's network. But even if they don't have a dialer, the call centers generate a lot of traffic, even if it's an inbound call center. Depending on their business, it's a high volume of traffic, and the calls can be of a short duration. So what was going on at MakaTel is that some of these call centers were generating a lot of traffic on their network, which is good, for business. But at the same time, the rate at which calls are sent to the network was overwhelming, and I think these call centers were exceeding the service level agreement. So their challenge was that they had to rate limit these calls in a graceful manner. They didn't want to just simply refuse calls. They wanted a solution to rate limit these calls gracefully and throttle the calls. The other challenge they had, they wanted to do this with a session border controller because, of course, they're delivering a SIP trunk to these call centers. The other challenge they had is, they looked at other solutions, other virtual SBCs from other vendors, and they found it very difficult to install. And they found that the licensing was complex, and it required many steps in the installation. And Alan, they were just not satisfied with such solutions.
Right. And if I remember correctly, one of the issues was they had to go to one place to get the operating system, someplace else to get the image, and this just wasn't practical for their application. So and what they ended up deploying they actually did it at the customer premises, and this is sort of an interesting story of what they finally put together using FreeSBC.
Yeah, that's right. So what they decided to do is, well, they are using FreeSBC. So TelcoBridges virtual session border controller software. They are installing it on bare metal servers, and you know, depending on the traffic, they don't need a killer server with, you know, an unbelievable CPU and RAM and disk. A very affordable server will be able to serve their needs. And so what they're doing is installing FreeSBC on a bare metal server that they're purchasing off the shelf. And by the way, you can use any server. Really, there are just a few requirements. For example, it has to be an Intel CPU, and you need to use a network interface card that's based on the Intel chipset. But that's just about all of the requirements or the prerequisites for FreeSBC. And so they're deploying this server with FreeSBC on customer premises, and they're using the call rate limiting features of FreeSBC to enforce the service level agreement that they have with their call center customer. And the installation, and you know, this is solving one of the challenges they had, is the simplicity of the installation. Installing FreeSBC is very easy on any computing platform, and you know, in fact, on a bare metal server, you just download an image of FreeSBC and you install it in the server, and it just takes a few minutes. The CentOS 7 operating system installs, the FreeSBC software installs, and it goes ahead and discovers the network interfaces, and you're ready to configure.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and we closed out with some feedback from Sergio Lopez, the engineering manager, and he reinforced how important it was that this one-step installation was critical for him, especially because he was sending the technicians out to do this install where the equipment and the software met up at the customer site, and he didn't want them to be there any longer than they need to be. So it was important for his deployment. So a great story, a great story. We're going to move on. We're actually running a little bit long here, so I'm quickly going to go over the evaluation process. So now you've taken a peek and you've listened to an overview of the platform. So how do you actually evaluate? How do you get started? Well, it all starts at a dedicated landing page at freesbc.com, where you should start your journey. It then at the bottom of that screen, what you would find is an option to download a FreeSBC, which would take you to a couple of choices, either choosing whether or not you would like to start with a non-supported version, or your intent is to start with a supported version. And one of the questions that's come up a couple of times in the Q&A here is, what's it cost for the supported version? So Mark, maybe you could just explain what the support costs are and what some of the minimums and maximums are.
Yeah, sure I can. So the paid version of FreeSBC, or the paid option, I'm saying paid version, but in fact it's not a different version. It's just the paid option. The price for that is $1 per session per year. And if you pay to use FreeSBC, you get basically the most important things that you get are 24/7 access to our technical support engineers. You get the integrated troubleshooting tools, and you get the OSS BSS connectors, which allow you to generate CDRs and supports Radius and SNMP, allows you to interface, with alliance partner solutions. And however, there is a minimum, which is $500 per year. So even if you, download FreeSBC for, let's say, 200 sessions, there's still a minimum $500 per year to get the support and the additional features. But there's also a maximum, and that's $20,000 per year. So even if you're using FreeSBC, let's say at 40,000 sessions, a license for 40,000 sessions, well, you're not paying 40,000. The paid version is capped at $20,000 per year.
Per server.
Per server, that's correct, or per SBC instance. Right. Oh, and Alan, I'll just say, you know, that when you go on the FreeSBC website like this, you can click download with support, download without support. You know, don't worry, we're not going to be asking you for a credit card if you choose the supported version. We just want you to indicate your intention.
Right, exactly. And in either case, you move on very quickly to an actual download confirmation, which helps you out with some instructions on how to install the software. And of course, a download image is sent to your browser, and a number of links here for some support materials, and of course, more detailed instructions on how to do the install. Once you step through the installation process, which Mark described a little bit earlier, you quickly move on to activating the software, which you access, of course, through a browser. You're given instructions to access a particular a port number, as shown here, and then this begins the actual wizard used to configure the SBC in all its features and capabilities, giving it a host name, and then eventually moving on to the web configuration portal, which this is a quick screenshot showing the kinds of features and capabilities that you have control over within the FreeSBC software. Well, we've got, I think we've covered a ton of material, and I did want to move on fairly quickly to get to some of these Q&A, but I wanted to summarize here quickly. This, as you probably heard, it really is an awesome platform with some great technology that's come through the expertise of TelcoBridges and all the work that they've done with service providers and their gateway business. Has been molded into a great, solid session border controller for service providers, and some of the use cases we showed today. Very easy to deploy, highly reliable. Obviously, you've heard about the cost of it. From free to $1 per session per year per server. You can't beat that total cost of ownership. People sometimes ask about, well, what other optional services? Well, there's professional services that are optional. We can help you with some of that. But it is a great model that helps pay as you grow kind of businesses that are trying to build new services, as we talked about earlier. And lastly, there's really a solid, clear future. Not only is this cloud-ready software ready to be put into your own cloud environment, but we do have a solid roadmap that includes, for example, access over AWS, or access through AWS, I should say, plus a number of other customer features that'll be mentioned actually in a newsletter we're working on. There's some new features coming this next week. And of course, a solid alliance partner program that extends what we're able to do with FreeSBC way beyond just the basics of a session border controller, as was mentioned. So we're going to close out with this, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. It all starts at freesbc.com, and after today's event, you should be taken to that website. Give it a try, and we generally think you really will like it. And we've gotten great feedback from those that have tried it so far. So, Mark, time to tackle this Q&A panel that's got 21 open questions in it. So we will dig into this and chip away at it as best we can. I know we're going to run over the 1 hour time period. If you could stick with us past the 1 hour, hopefully we'll answer your question. If you don't, our apologies, and hopefully you can catch it in the recording that we'll send out a little bit later here. So let's start at the top of the list, which is support for MSRP. That was a question Mark?
Yeah, I think the answer is the FreeSBC does not support MSRP.
Right.
If I recall correctly, this protocol is used to support messages using SIP, like SMSs, for example. And at this time, FreeSBC does not support MSRP,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right. Yep. And another question was about the cost of the transcoding hardware.
Yes. So the transcoding hardware, like I mentioned, is a hardware device. It is available in 2 versions, and really the different versions are the transcoding capacity. So on the FreeSBC website, you'll find a data sheet for this transcoding hardware. So you can view the capacities there, and you can view the codecs that are supported as well. And the price for the FreeSBC hardware is the following. There's the smaller capacity version, for which the price is $5,000, and the higher capacity version, which supports double the transcoding capacity, is $10,000.
Right. Yep. So let's see. Another question is more detailed. Obviously, more detailed feature list, and there's some things like questions about TLS, which we should mention. Obviously, that's all covered in the data sheet, which is on the freesbc.com website. But specifically, SIP over TLS and SRTP right now is still a roadmap item. It's not supported by the current version of the SBC.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep, there's a flurry of questions about Skype for Business, and I think this bears addressing. So the questions come up, does it work with Skype for Business? Well, first of all, it has not been certified with Skype for Business and has not gone through the TechVision certification testing. However, it has been deployed by a couple of our partners on a Skype Connect implementation, providing a termination point for the SIP trunks that come from Skype Connect. So hopefully that answers that question. And if there's a significant business in the enterprise space for Skype for Business, and I guess we'd like to hear about it and use that as some justification for some roadmap enhancements. And as we noted during the session today, it's really not targeted towards enterprise applications, but more for hosted and service provider applications. So that answers that. So moving on to another question from Neil, a question about microservices and Docker. And I think we probably addressed it indirectly earlier with the answer about the operating systems. The solution does come with its own standalone embedded CentOS 7 operating system. So it's not designed to work, or it's not currently offered for a Docker or microservices environment at this point.
That's right.
Right. When we showed the performance limitations, Neil then asked about the registered devices limitations on performance, the 350,000 registered devices. So I don't know if you can offer any clarification on what that is.
Yeah, for sure, I can do that. So when it comes to registration, FreeSBC is not a registrar. It forwards register requests to the registrar behind it, typically a soft switch or an IPPBX, for example. So what FreeSBC, and not only does it forward the register request, it also keeps in memory the result of these registrations, so that FreeSBC is able to refresh a registration on behalf of the soft switch behind it. And so this is where this limitation comes to a maximum of 350,000 registered devices, is that FreeSBC needs to keep in memory all of these registrations and the responses to these registrations, so that it can refresh them. So that's why there's a limit as to 350,000. And I think this comes, let's say, related to the amount of RAM that is available on the server. If 350,000 is not enough, I think we could probably look into using more RAM to support more. But still, 350,000 is quite a bit.
Yeah, oh, that's a pretty impressive number. So Jesus wondered about, it's an awesome question because I think we answered it, which is where could he find a list of the certified SIP service providers and soft switches, which again you mentioned was on the wiki.
Yeah, that's right. And but I'd like to say the following though, is that on the wiki you'll find the list of certified soft switches and other solutions as well, not only soft switches on our docs.telcobridges.com. You'll find that there. But we don't list certified SIP service providers. And it comes back to what you said, Alan, is, you know, the FreeSBC is not intended at this time for enterprise applications. You know, it's mostly a peering SBC and access SBC, and therefore we don't certify FreeSBC with the SIP service providers.
Right.
But, you know, the SIP stack has been deployed all over the world in more than 100 countries. So Jesus, if you have a specific service provider in mind, you can send us email and we can find out if we've deployed in the past with a specific service provider or service providers.
Right, right. Moving on, Neil had a couple of great questions here about Amazon and Azure, Google. And I think we hinted at this in that we're very close to announcing support for AWS and eventually hosting the software in the marketplace, which would help with evaluation, make it much easier for people to be able to evaluate. So keep your ears peeled for that. And Azure Google is, I think, still a roadmap item. So that is coming. Juan asked a question about rate limiting and do we support it with caps and what happens to the excess traffic? Mark, maybe you might want to address that.
Yeah, for sure. I can talk about that a bit. So FreeSBC allows you to limit calls in many ways. So let's take a given trunk group on FreeSBC. You can configure this trunk group to only handle a maximum number of incoming calls, a maximum number of outgoing calls, and or if you prefer, a maximum number of total calls. But you can also configure on the trunk group a maximum call rate, and that by default will be call attempts, right? Because the call rate is applied on incoming calls on the trunk group. So, you know, no matter what the routing engine determines, and no matter what the result is on the corresponding outgoing call leg, the FreeSBC is measuring the rate on incoming calls. So by default, it's performed on call attempts per second. And then the other part of the question was what happens if we exceed, you know, the call rate? Well, the SBC will do it gracefully. You know, what it will do is that if the call rate exceeds the configured maximum, FreeSBC in a first step will throttle the calls. It won't refuse the calls right away. It will keep them in queue, right, in order to be able to handle them if you know, when the network conditions allow it, you know, to handle these calls that exceed the given call rate. But if that time is too long, then FreeSBC will just refuse the calls. And then there's another step after that where, if the call rate is exceeded for too long, well, the FreeSBC will just simply refuse the call instead of trying to do its best to handle them, and it will just refuse the call with the appropriate cause code, sending to the peer.
Right. So we got actually a couple of different questions about enum. Do we support it, and does it support it with an external server for external routing?
Yeah, and Alan, I think the question's being asked, and the idea typically, in voice communications like this and these session border controller applications, enum is a protocol that can be used to query an external route server.
Right.
And so, yes, the answer is yes. FreeSBC supports enum. So you can use this protocol to query an external route server. However, what I'd like to say is that we prefer to use the SIP protocol to do this, or the radius protocol, because the use of enum will reduce the performance of the SBC, because the enum queries are performed synchronously with the call routing, whereas the SIP queries and the radius queries are performed asynchronously. But the bottom line is that yes, enum queries are supported.
Right. Let's see. So here's an easy one. Is TB Analytics included in the $ per year per session? And the answer to that is yes. Matter of fact, that is one of the key features that you get with the paid $ per year per session. So that's an easy one. And then why don't we wrap up with this one here? How is 1+1 redundancy handled on an IP level? And I think that would be a good closeout question.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that. So FreeSBC supports high availability deployment. We call it 1+1 configuration, where an active session border controller is protected by a standby session border controller. And the way it works is that there is at least one dedicated path between the active and the standby FreeSBC deployments. Typically, we install two interconnection, Ethernet connections between the two for redundancy. And so there's a set of polling mechanisms between the active and the standby that check on the status of the different software modules that are running, and also checks on, let's say, to evaluate the general health of both the active and the standby. These two SBCs function as a single system. So when you configure and manage this 1+1 system, you only go to the active SBC, and the configuration changes that you make there get replicated on the standby SBC. So if there is a switchover between from the active to the standby because of some failure, either software or hardware failure, well, then the standby takes on exactly the same configuration as the active SBC, and to be very clear about that, it takes on exactly the same configuration, meaning IP addresses on the network interfaces, the call routing, the trunk groups, everything is identical. So that you can imagine that, the configuration just moves from the active to the standby. And I see there's a question, Alan, since I'm discussing 1+1, and I think we have to tell everyone, there's a question about, is it hitless? And the answer is no. The switchover from active to standby today is not hitless. We have in the roadmap planned for later this year the implementation of the high availability feature of our SIP stack. And so later on, switchovers from active to standby within a 1+1 system will be hitless, but at this time it's not.
Right. Well, I don't know whether we should be honored or but there's a whole host of questions on the chat window too that I just discovered. So let me take. I've just taken a quick scroll through this, and some of them we've already answered. But there are a couple here that we should probably address. One of them, I'm sorry, one of them was, we talked about SIP over TLS, that's not currently supported, but is a roadmap item, and similarly SRTP is also at this point a roadmap item, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And our implementation of these features, those two features being TLS and SRTP, is how would I say, will be done in phases.
Right.
Right. So first, we will implement SIP over TCP, which is required for TLS, and then we will implement the handling of SRTP, meaning the FreeSBC will be able to handle SRTP traffic without the encryption. And then in another phase we'll implement TLS, and finally the full implementation of SRTP. So this will be rolled out this year, and I think finally, ultimately, like in September this year, TLS and SRTP will be fully implemented.
Right. And it probably bears explanation on how transcoding is handled. There were a couple of questions about that. So maybe we could just spend a moment and talk about how transcoding is done with the DSP resources, and I think that would be good.
Sure. So I'll use the opportunity to recall to everyone. So the way FreeSBC implements transcoding is using TelcoBridges hardware. These are transcoding devices that are equipped with voice over IP DSPs in order to, decode encoded voice in RTP packets and re-encode that voice back into RTP packets. And the way transcoding is implemented is that these transcoding devices, and you can deploy multiple devices, if you need to support a very large capacity for transcoding. These devices are attached to FreeSBC via 2 gigabit Ethernet ports. And these gigabit Ethernet ports are separate from, how would I say, the voice over IP ports that are visible from the outside world. So a call, an incoming call to FreeSBC that needs to be transcoded will hit the FreeSBC server or FreeSBC instance, and then FreeSBC will determine that the RTP needs to be transcoded. So it will send the RTP to the transcoding device, which will do its transcoding job, and it will send the transcoded media back to the FreeSBC server, and that media will be forwarded by the SBC server on the outgoing call leg. So the outside world only sees the IP addresses or the voice over IP interfaces of FreeSBC. It does not see the transcoding devices which are internal to the system.
Right. Okay, and the list continues here. So we're going to do a few more, and then, and I think then we could call it a wrap. So we're getting down to the last couple of here. So I'm skipping along here. So does the SBC get Moss opinion score, or does it report it, and how? And I guess, out of the RTP.
Yes, it does. So the FreeSBC calculates the mean opinion score and makes it available in different ways. One of them is it can write the mean opinion score to a call detail record, and it will also display the mean opinion score in call trace. And by the way, I'll use the opportunity, Alan. So if you recall what I said about call trace is, you can search historical calls and find an interesting call that you want to troubleshoot or you want to view. Well, you'll be able to see the mean opinion score for that call. But if you have an ongoing call on FreeSBC and you want to stop that call because it's determined to be fraudulent or you may have other reasons, the FreeSBC has a drop call feature as part of call trace, and you just click a button and the FreeSBC will terminate a call, an ongoing call that you have targeted.
Right. So Josh has got a question here about if I got more than 350,000 registrations are required, do we have a product that can load balance across multiple instances? And I think we chatted about this actually with a couple of people over the last few weeks. And at this point, we do not have our own load balancer, but that would be an awesome situation for us to work on as part of our alliance network. And I know we are actively looking for a load balancer to work with to help those kinds of situations.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep. And let's see, and I saw Dan had a call here, or Dan had a question here towards the end, Dan Strong. And what I'm doing, by the way, is I'm looking to see what questions there are and who's still on the call and answering their questions, just so you know. So,
okay.
So Dan had a question. He's got 3 TelcoBridges gateways, I'm assuming, running. Can he install FreeSBC to work with them? And of course, compatibility with existing TelcoBridges gateways is a great question.
And yes, the answer is yes, of course. FreeSBC is compatible with TelcoBridges voice over IP gateways, compatible with voice over IP with the transcoding gateways, and yes, we can even design a system where FreeSBC and the TelcoBridges gateways are running as part of the same system, which brings some advantages when it comes to management and configuration.
Right. Well, I have to admit we've gone 20 minutes over our time slot, and there are some other good questions that are in here. Most of the rest of them are going to take a little bit more explanation than a quick question or quick answer, I should say. So we are going to close it here, and what we're going to do is we'll take the rest of these questions. We do get a chat and, of course, a Q&A log on the webinar platform. It might take us a day or two to get through all the rest of the questions with a quick answer, and we will include that in the follow-up email that goes out in the next day or so here. So we promise we'll get back to folks on their individual questions. So apologies if we couldn't get to everyone, but I also wanted to close out with a reminder that this is the first of a series of webinars. We're going to move on and talk about some of the use cases, specific use cases with customers, and some how-to sessions on how to configure and management of FreeSBC. Luke is going to be working with us on that. He's our director of our technical support group, and he'll be stepping through some of the configuration and management issues. So watch for those future sessions and watch for the invites as they come along. And Mark, you've been super awesome today. This has been a lot of content we've had to cover today, and appreciate everything that you brought to the table for the audience.
You're welcome. And Alan, I think the participants were better. Thank you very much for all the questions. It makes for a more interesting presentation, right?
It was. It's great to have such engaged audience. So, and as I noted in the opening housekeeping, we will be sending out an email in the next couple of days with the links not only to the slides but also to a recording, and we'll do our best at these this long list of questions before sending it out. So, that's it from here. I thank everyone for spending the time with us and wish everyone a really great day today. So thanks again.